G'day, welcome to another episode of the Pier Review. This is part 2 of our peer review of the science of learning. So if you haven't watched part 1, I suggest you go back and have a look at that one. Because in part 1, we found out how the science of learning became a bit of an ideology, how it was practiced in the classroom, and some of the theories behind it. And we started to unpack and look at some of the possible contradictions in the theory. In this episode, we're going to look at that a little bit more deeply and look at how some researchers, with actually some credibility this time, unlike our friend Trisha Jarre from the Centre for Independent Studies, and see what they say about the science of learning. Now, while we came to the conclusion in the last episode that Trisha Jarre is not exactly an expert and should be standing on the pier alongside me, we must remember that I am just a mug standing on a pier with the same level of expertise as Trisha, possibly a little bit more. But what do some real experts say about the science of learning? Well, back in 2013, an article appeared in Spiked magazine, which started to query the then emerging science of learning. The article criticised the dogma of scientism, which it said led to policy being judged not on whether it was good or bad policy, but whether it was based on evidence. Specifically, it criticised taking a methodology from one discipline, namely medicine, and applying it to another, namely education. This led to a false equivalence being drawn between a child and a patient. This in turn led the science of learning to be based on an interventionist approach, where there's some deficit in the child that needs to be tackled. The problem being that where medical intervention is about curing, healing, or preventing, education is about teaching, which is a very different thing. The assumption that children are afflicted by intellectual deficits and that teachers must fix these intellectual deficits through intervention. Now, teachers are being turned into educational healers who cure children of that pedagogically validated deficit. The problem with this approach is that it leads to an unbalanced focus on what teaching strategy works. The problem with this is that an over-focus on what works leads to a lack of focus on what children actually need to learn. It's a focus on the means of teaching as opposed to one on the ends of education. Now, that article was written by Professor Frank Furedi, a sociologist from the University of Kent, and it was 2013. But let's look a little bit more recently, a little closer to home, and to the views of an actual practicing educator. Mahoney is an Australian educator who writes a blog called The Interruption and has written a number of articles on the science of learning, this one being from 2023. Tom argues that the science of learning is fundamentally an ideology, more on what education and teaching ought to look like, rather than on an actual evidence-based approach. He cites research stating that the ideology emphasises that teachers and schools ought to treat their practice scientifically to bring about learning in the most effective and efficient way possible. I would question the word effective, but what would I know? I'm just a mug standing on a pier. Mahoney states that the science of learning is actually the politics of learning and is trying to impose its own construction of what a teacher should look like onto the wider profession. A one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't de-individualise teachers, does it, Tissot? Tom Mahoney's conclusion is that the science of learning is not actually scientific, nor does it engage with genuine education. And while he's not opposed to the science of learning as such, he is opposed to the imposition of certain perspectives of what it means to be a teacher that arise from an impoverished perspective of what education ought to bring about. So, is Tom Mahoney just a mug who should be standing on a pier? Well, Tom, like Trisha, is a researcher from Deakin University, except that Tom is employed by Deakin and Trisha just did an initial teacher education course there. Unlike Trisha, Tom has a profile on ResearchGate and has published research papers to his name. And while Tom is also a practicing maths teacher and educational leader in Victorian schools, he's also completing a PhD. Now, it was this next post on Tom Mahoney's blog, The Interruption, which prompted me to make this video. And you'll note that that was back in 2024, so apologies, Tom, for taking so long, but wasn't really sure how to tackle it. Anyway, in that post, Tom explores some other consequences of the implementation of a science of learning approach. Because when initial teacher education focuses only on explicit learning, the student teachers are actually even worse off when they face the realities of what school is actually like, in terms of things such as behaviour management and relationships, etc. And that's because the science of learning regards those other people who inhabit our schools, the learners, as simply vessels that need to be filled with knowledge, not actually as people that we have to relate to, know and understand. And Tom cites another example of where the evangelical nature of the science of learning shuts down any professional conversation amongst educators about what might work best, because science of learning might claim it knows best, but we have to remember that we are all individuals, though I'm not. Now, Tom Mahoney is certainly more qualified to speak on this topic than I am, but as I'm more qualified than Trisha, I'd now just like to share my experience of how I conducted the learning for some of my students. Well, I'd start with some explicit teaching. Not call and response like Pratesh Rotura, but small chunks of focused learning, encouraging student questions for clarification and checking for understanding. Then I would get the students to apply that learning in an authentic environment, such as that they would encounter in the real world, because this was vocational education. Students would lead teams, and in undertaking that work, they would come across challenges that they would need to solve, such as poor water quality, for example, or fish health issues. I'd be there in the capacity of a workplace supervisor, whom they could approach if they needed assistance or for clarification. If I just taught them the facts, Pritesh Raichura style, they would have had no idea of how to apply that knowledge. And if I'd let them find it all out by themselves by discovery, then they wouldn't have found it all out. And two, a lot of our fish would have died. I wasn't following a science of learning or ideological approach. I was teaching, and the students were learning in the most effective and efficient way for the knowledge and skills that they needed to acquire and later apply. But interestingly, it's actually a known proponent of the science of learning who really cuts to the chase in terms of what's important. Adam Boxer, who has 60,000 followers on X, including some of my fellow teaching fellows, in 2019, Adam Boxer wrote a blog post called "Teaching and Learning is Dead." Although he was responding to Ofsted requirements in the UK for walkthroughs and observations, he said some really interesting things, and I'm not sure if he realised their significance. He said that it's frustrating to be told by someone who doesn't know your subject area that you're teaching it wrong, as if teaching is a universal set of practices that could be employed in any classroom. He says it's wrong because it starts with the teaching, not with the content, and then cites Frederick Reif, who has this study where he regards S as the student at the initial point to S at the student at the final point, and in between is the learning. The teaching, Adam Boxer says, is the least interesting bit in this process. The important thing is, what have they actually learned? And the important thing to consider is, how are we going to get from SI to SF? The answer is curriculum. The student final knowledge is different in his subject to that of the observer, telling him what to do or how to teach it. Boxer concludes this article by saying he's sure as hell not going to come into your class and tell you that your teaching is wrong. But that's just what Adam Boxer, Trisha Jha, and all the science of learning ideologues are doing. And why does Adam Boxer, in this rare moment of brilliance, say that he shouldn't tell you how to teach? Well, why? Because Adam Boxer says that he doesn't have a clue. Now, as we approach the end of this two-part examination of the science of learning, there is a fundamental paradox about the Centre for Independent Studies' approach to the science of learning that I'd like to look at. The Centre for Independent Studies says that it promotes free choice and individual liberty. So why does it promote an ideology that implies a system of education in which teaching professionals have no choice in how they teach, and in which students have no individual liberty in how they learn? And why does the Centre for Independent Studies believe we need the science of learning? Well, in this video, CIS Director of Education says,
Glenn, why is a liberal think tank worrying about education?
For us, it's fundamentally about the idea that the work of education is about creating that free person.
really? To develop the free person?
I see you say strong ionic bond.
Strong ionic bond!
I don't think so. So maybe, at best, the science of learning should be called the science of education, or the science of teaching. Because as Tom Mahoney says, it's not so much about having a scientific disposition, and it's not fundamentally about the learner, but adhering to the ideology of how teachers should teach. And if teachers have to conform to this ideology, consider the learner, who has even less say in it. Because the biggest issue with the science of learning advocates is the all or nothing approach. Firstly, they wrongly assume that all learning in schools is experiential or inquiry-based learning. It isn't, and it never has been. Second, they insist that all learning must be delivered by explicit instruction. That's not only soul-destroying, but it's fundamentally inadequate. But let's finally come back to our definition of science. Science is experiential learning. That's the whole point of it. Learning through experimentation. Science is inquiry-based learning, starting with some knowns and then exploring the possibilities. Science starts with a hypothesis and then conducts an exploration to find out if it's true and proven. My hypothesis was that the science of learning is a crock of shit, because learning is not a science, and the science of learning is not learning, by which we mean understanding, but merely indoctrination. And nor is it science. This is because, from the perspective of both the learner and the teacher, the science of learning rests on the premise that you cannot question it, which is itself the antithesis of science. And even a mug standing on a pier has the right to question something. So I hereby declare my hypothesis proven. So yeah, that's the conclusion of our parts 1 and 2 of the science of learning. A peer review on a pier by a peer, at least a peer of the person who wrote the most forthright paper in Australia, someone who's not an educational researcher and merely is a bit of a step away from a practicing teacher. So if you've enjoyed this video, please click like, please subscribe, hit me up in the comments below if you're a practicing educator and your views on the explicit instruction dogma and ideology. And yeah, we'll wait and see what is the next peer review. Thanks for watching.